This is Killer Innovations, a show about ideas, creativity, and how you can innovate. Welcome to the Innovator's Garage, where you learn to create your next game-changing killer innovation.
Welcome to Killer Innovations. I'm your host, Phil McKinney. We are back here in the studio in Colorado. In fact, we just finished a bunch of new technology upgrades. I know some of you want to geek out on all the gear I have here. So one of these times I'm actually going to do a video tour, but I've got to get it straightened up here a little bit. It's a little bit still in a work in progress, but we've got a lot of new stuff going on here, and many of you have been following over on Facebook with the customizations and the work that's going on the new 45-foot Prevost. Yes, we've upgraded the mobile studio, so we're getting that ready to hit the road in the late fall timeframe. As I've shared before in the show, we are looking to expand that series around rural innovation. So innovation happening in the non-obvious places. As you may recall, some time ago we did a show in Paducah, Kentucky. We took the mobile studio to Paducah, and we did a series of shows from there, and it turned out to be extremely popular. And we've been getting some requests. But if you've got a lead or an idea for a rural innovator who you think has a great story and proving that innovation can happen anywhere, it's not something dedicated to Silicon Valley or New York or Boston or Austin or even here in Boulder, Colorado, would love to hear about it and love to maybe stop by while I'm on the road and interview them and give them an opportunity to tell their story here on Killer Innovations. So with that, today's show, we have a guest who's actually been involved in the innovation game for about as long as I've been around doing this. And in fact, we were commenting on the fact that I think the first time we met has got to be a decade or more ago. At some early open innovation efforts. But I wanted to introduce today's guest, Stephen Shapiro. Stephen has been involved in the innovation work more than 20 years, where he leading the 20,000 person innovation practice at the consulting firm Accenture. He's gone on, he's written a whole number of series of books, developed tools and methodologies to improve people's productivity and creativity and how to create high-performing innovation teams. He has a new book. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the show. But Stephen, thank you for joining today here at Killer Innovations.
Well, Phil, it's an honor to be here. Thanks so much.
Hey, Stephen, some people know you because they've read your books. Some people on the listeners may not know who you are. So give us a little bit of background on yourself.
Sure. So I think it's probably worthwhile just start going sort of way back a little bit, because most people who think of somebody who's in the world of innovation thinks of us as sort of these wackadoodle creative people. And in fact, I'm a nerd. I was in the math club in high school. I was in marching band. I'm an engineer by education. And so, when I started entering the world of innovation about 25 years ago, I felt like a fish out of water in some respects, because it was this wildly inefficient process where I felt like we were doing a lot of work and not much was getting done. And so as I've steeped deeper and deeper into innovation, I've tried to create an approach that actually works for nerds and left-brainers and technology people and accountants and lawyers and people who might not think of themselves as creative are still in the business of innovating and problem solving.
This is an interesting topic because I talk about this all the time. I'm amazed when I run into people who do not think of themselves as being creative. And my position is everybody's creative. We've just had it beat out of us, or we're self-conscious. We're not going to, we're introverts. We're not extroverts. We're not going to put our ideas out there. We may have them in our head. Are you in the same, mindset around people's individual creativity?
Absolutely. I mean, I do think that we all start off with an incredibly high level of creativity. There's a lot of studies that, whether they're accurate or not, show that 98% of 5-year-old kids are highly creative. So, we started off this way, but, I think each of us are creative in our own way. And so there might be some people who really are just good at coming up with really crazy ideas. and they're extroverted so they can bring them out. But then there's people like myself who's very introverted and very analytical. And so I might take a different approach, but hopefully the end result is the same. I just might take a different process to get there.
Yeah, and it's interesting because people think of innovation, it's one of the innovation myths, right? That talk to the fact that, there's a lone inventor, right? There's different skill sets. And in fact, a show we just recently broadcast talked about teams and what are the different skills you need on a team. You need the visionary, the person who's got maybe the idea, but you need somebody who actually can then drive execution. You need to have those people who kind of are the warriors, making sure every I's dotted and T is crossed. I always have a person on my team who I call the mother. She wants to make sure everybody feels heard and nobody gets, ignored or pushed back. That they pull the ideas out of the introverts. Those types of things. And so I think teams become the most important component then, right?
I believe it's all about the teams. I think it's all about collaboration. It's why one of my products is actually a card game that is built around how do we get the right people in the right role, recognizing that there are some people who are good at the data and the analytics and understanding where do we focus our energies. And there are those nurturing motherly types who want to bring out the best in people. There's all different styles, and we just need to understand that who we are. But I think more importantly, this is where a lot of these tests fall down is who we are is important, but who we are not is actually, to me, the cornerstone of a successful team. Because if we can embrace who we are not, then we will surround ourselves with people who complement with an E. And I think that's really the key.
Yeah, and I think that is also truly having that recognition of what you're good at and what you're not good at. I don't care, how good you think you are. We all have gaps, holes, blind spots. And in the case of your work at Accenture, how, the experience of running a 20,000 person practice, innovation practice at Accenture back in the, what I would call the early days of the big five trying to establish innovation practices. What was that experience like?
Well, it was excellent. I mean, I have to admit that I actually started my career earlier on with business process reengineering, which in some respects was the opposite of innovation. It's why I got into innovation.
Yeah, well, I'll admit, I was at CSC at the time.
There you go. So, excellent.
Yeah, well, so the whole BP
really well.
Yeah, the whole BBR stuff is gives me nightmares.
Well, for me, I just had this one moment where I was working on a project where the CEO announced that 10,000 people would lose their jobs because of the work we were doing. And the reality is, when it's large numbers, it's hard to get your head around it. But then I saw a TV show about 3 executives from my client who lost their jobs a year earlier and what happened. And I just saw the devastation in their lives. And I was like, wow, if it hit 3 people that hard, I can't imagine the collective impact of 10,000. I actually walked off the project and took a leave of absence. So that's how I got into the world of innovation, is I wanted to help companies grow, help economies grow, rather than shrink and contract.
Yeah, and it's amazing. Even leaders in today's world, they don't think of it as a, how do I avoid that versus it's just a budget exercise or just a financial decision to, impact thousands of people. And, I remind leaders I coach every day, you're impacting one individual. That's not the case. You're impacting a family, right? With every decision you make. And as a leader, as a servant leader, you own that. You own that responsibility to serve, your employees and to make sure that you understand that your decisions are not just impacting them, but that entire family. So in the case of Accenture in the work there, what were some of the big lessons learned you had?
I think one of the big lessons that I learned early on, fortunately, was that, as we talked about before, everyone is creative, everyone's innovative. We just contribute in different ways. And I really did have this belief that we needed to find the people who were the ones who like to sit on high mountains wearing long white robes, but that's, or you're in Colorado, the people who want to sit on the beach smoking a joint and looking at the clouds. I mean, and I look, when you're working with a company like Accenture, most of the people are pretty left-brained, if you want to call them that. They're a lot of. I was an engineer. A lot of the people I worked with were engineers. So we needed to create something that would resonate with them.
Yeah, and I think that you bring up a good point, right? It's you have to adapt it to the culture of the organization, to the mindset of the people. And you get these calls all the time where people are saying, "Hey, I want to take something out of my book, beyond the obvious, and I'm just going to apply it to my organization." And I say, no, don't do that. You've got to adapt it to your organization. You have to adapt it to your language. You have to adapt it to your processes. Otherwise, it's like an antibody. It's going to be totally rejected because it looks foreign versus you're trying to unlock the natural capabilities of your teams and your people. And how do you make that all work? And how do you stitch that all together? So, great point. We're going to take a quick commercial break, and we're going to continue our conversation with Stephen Shapiro. We're going to talk about his new book, Invisible Solutions. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this quick commercial break. Welcome back to Killer Innovation. So, Stephen, as we were talking about the experience and the work at Accenture, one of the things you were talking about in the last segment was about this personality poker card game, about how do you bring people together to think differently and work together. Give me some more background. Now, I remember you and I talked about this a long, long time ago, but refresh my memory here. Give me a little context for the card game.
Sure. So the premise is that there's 4 steps to the innovation process, and there are 4 different styles that link back to those steps. And so originally this was just a spreadsheet. So just talking about where we make connections. It was a spreadsheet that I developed about 20 years ago, very boring. I'd use it and people would fall asleep trying to use it. It was just nothing exciting. And then I was in Vegas playing blackjack at the Venetian, and I got this idea. Wait, there's 4 steps, 4 styles, 4 suits. So I went home, grabbed a deck of poker cards, wrote the words from the spreadsheet that I was using, and that was the first version of personality poker. And the goal is to get people, basically for them to play to their strong suit, which means do what you do best, but it's also to make sure that your team is playing with a full deck. And this is where I think a lot of organizations fall flat, because we tend to hire people who fit the mold. We hire people who are similar to us, and as a result, we don't have that breadth of thinking and those breadth of personalities and that breadth of experience that we so richly need.
Yeah, it is interesting, right? Because how would you compare then what that is to things like, I don't know if you're familiar with Gallup, Strength Finders, et cetera. How does it either alike, different, or how does it play into the whole innovation game?
So for me, the key, first of all, is that it's not about strengths per se. It's not about what you're good at. It's what gives you energy. And I think there's a big difference, because we can be good at something, but we need to understand we've learned to be good at a lot of the things that we do well in order to be successful, but it might rob us of our energy. So the game has you reflect on what you do particularly well in terms of what gives you energy. It is all team-based. So the whole objective is to figure out who you are not. So most people, when they play personality poker, 95% of the people will be missing a suit from their hand.
Oh, really?
And what that means is there's one of the styles. So the spades are the analytical, the diamonds are the more creative, the clubs are the more implementation oriented, and the hearts are more relational in nature. And it just tells you who you need. Who you don't have in your hand tells you who you need. And we do so much more with it, though, in terms of the culture, because the culture really is just a form of personality of an organization.
Well, it's interesting because then, it's like, okay, do you draw from the deck, quote, hiring somebody that provides you a suit you don't have? Or do you recognize where you potentially have a gap and you just become aware of it? What's been the impact on teams, from when they started going through this experience to the other side, once they can see who they are also relative to who everybody else is?
Well, one of my favorite ways to play the game is also, we call it the gifting of the cards. So to step back for a moment, there's 52 cards, each with suits, colors, and numbers, but there's also words that describe particular behavioral attributes like analytical, creative, organized, or empathetic. And when we gift cards, we give cards to others. So Phil, I would give you a card and I would tell you a story as a time when we worked together. So not only do you get to see how you're perceived, but you also hear the stories and what other people remember. And so it becomes a great and powerful conversation starter inside of organizations. And it helps people align who they are with how others perceive them. Because one of the key things that I think happens is people burn out when people see you differently than you see yourself, because the work you get aligned to and assigned to might not be consistent with what gives you energy. And so it's just a great way to make sure we're doing the work we're meant to do. We have the right team of the right people. And I'll just add one last thing here, which is we talk about the need to have diverse perspectives. The reality is if you have diverse perspectives and you don't have a deep appreciation for what those diverse perspectives bring, you actually create a low performing team. So
okay, hold on. I want to drill on that one, right? So run that by me one more time. Now, if your first listen, I would say you're saying diversity may not always be good.
Well, I'm not saying it's not good, but it's not good if you don't have the tools in place. So if you took a group of people who are analytical, creative, organized, and empathetic and put them on a team and said, go work on this, it's going to be anarchy. You're going to have the black cards who tend to be the but people. They're going to be the ones who say, this is the reason why it doesn't work, because the spades and the clubs are very good at stopping conversations. So you need to have a deep appreciation for what each person brings to the table in order to create a high-performing team. Then diversity is exactly what you want, but you can't just throw a bunch of people together in a room and expect them to work well together if they don't have a common language and a common appreciation.
So would you classify then that as some form of, I don't know what you want to call it, understanding or empathy, for the understanding that you're one type, you have other types, nobody's better or worse, just different? Is that what you're trying to say?
I think it's a great way to say it.
Okay.
I think that each person has, and the problem is we believe that, we talk about opposites attract. Actually, the reality is opposites detract. Birds of a feather like to flock together. So we surround ourselves with people who think like us, and that's great for efficiency. It's great for ease, but it's not great for innovation, as you know. Right. And so this is a tool to help create high-performing, diverse innovation teams.
Right. I'm a big believer that you've got to have diversity, but it's not just diversity in these types of things. When you're talking about personalities or strength finders, I'm also a big believer in diversity of experiences. People who came from money, people who don't come from money, people who've only lived in the United States, people who've lived overseas, a foreign immigrant who came to college here and stayed and started a company. All of those different perspectives, including personality. And I never really thought about personality until this conversation, about kind of that inherent, I don't know what you want to call it, the thing in us that like you said, though, is around what gives us energy, is something that's hard for people to tap into. You really got to know yourself for you to naturally know that without some kind of tool or help.
Absolutely. And that's why I love the gifting of the cards, though, is the way somebody else sees you is not necessarily who you are or how you are, but it's another data point. And so to me, taking a test is the least effective way to learn who you are. It's about conversation, collaboration, and storytelling is where we learn the most.
Yeah, and I did a TEDx talk around imposter syndrome, right? And and if you suffer from imposter syndrome, people may come up to you and say, "Hey, man, you did a really great job," and you immediately pawn it off. "Oh, I was just lucky," or "I had a great team," or "Oh, wasn't that really big deal?" We have a hard time accepting kind of that acknowledgement and recognition, and the gifting of the card sounds like it's almost that validation. You may know it gives you energy, and it's something that brings some level of different satisfaction, but to have it confirmed, to have it verbalized. In fact, one of the things I teach when I work with senior people who are suffering from imposter syndrome is getting them comfortable at accepting those kinds of confirmations. Now, there are other people, big ego people, who just love to get fluffed up by people saying great things about them, but this gifting of the card could be could be a great tool. We're going to take a quick commercial break. When we come back, we're going to continue our conversation with Stephen Shapiro. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this quick commercial break. Welcome back to Killer Innovations. We are continuing our conversations with Stephen Shapiro. Stephen, your new book, Invisible Solutions. Kind of an interesting title. Give us a little background. What was it that drove you to work on this new book?
So when my last book came out, which has been a long time ago, my last book was in 2011, and I submitted the manuscript. And as soon as I submitted the manuscript and people started reading it, they said, this part about asking better questions is really interesting. You talk about why it's important and you talk about what you need to do, but you don't talk about how to do it. And people struggled with it. So I spent the past 10 years building a toolkit basically around reframing problems. And eventually I decided it's time for me to put it into a book. And the reason why it's called Invisible Solutions is because sometimes the best solutions are right in front of you, but you just can't see them because you're asking the wrong questions. And the questions we ask, to a degree that most people don't understand, has a profound impact on the solutions we're going to find.
Well, it's interesting because my book came out in February of 2012 now on Beyond the Obvious, and it's all about the asking the questions and how do you think about questions and how do you frame questions. In my experience, heavily, telling stories from my own experience of working on products and technologies for 30 years, but questions are a lot. People view them as almost being a little bit of a black art. Some people are good at crafting them. Some people are not that great at crafting them. So talk a little bit about this, the methodology that you use or the approach you use to how to help people understand the power of questions and then how to craft good ones.
Sure. So and it's interesting that coming back to the earlier conversation we had, look, there are some people who are great at asking questions, and in personality poker, they would be the spades. Okay. Because they like to look at, I love this quote from Mark Twain, who basically called it a mental kaleidoscope. He said, if we're looking to find new ideas, he says, there's really nothing new. It's just the same old colored pieces of glass that have been in existence since the beginning of time, and we just keep on turning them. So what I want to do is create a tool for engineers like myself, for anybody, but mainly engineers, where they have this kaleidoscope, which is a systematic approach for reframing the problem.
Right.
And I just find it, to me, it's just it's a fascinating, when you change the question, the range of solutions, it just becomes miraculous what you end up seeing.
Yeah, it is about changing perspective, right? Because look, we all have habits, we all have ruts, we all have, I've seen this problem before, this process worked for me last time, I'm just going to apply the same rule. I'm going to see this as a math problem, I've got a formula, I'm going to apply the formula, versus how do you get people to take that step back and come at it orthogonally, completely with a different, kind of a view on both the problem or the opportunity that's before them. So how foreign is this for people? When you shared this or did workshops or whatever, what's kind of the aha moment? What do you think kind of unlocks it for people to say, wow, I can do this?
I think what happens for people is, first of all, they have a deep appreciation of how important it is.
Yeah.
They also start to understand how difficult it is because it's not how we're wired. We don't want to sit back. Look, we want to, if we feel a threat or if we see an opportunity, we want to run towards it. If it's a great opportunity, we want to run away from it if it's a threat. And we don't tend to take the time to stop and say, what's the right direction? Right. What's the right approach we could be using? So people struggle with it in the beginning, but it's like building a muscle and they become better at it over time. So I think that's really the cool opportunity. The third thing which they notice is they struggle to stay in the question. As soon as they get a new question, they want to start solving it. They can't stay in the question stage.
Well, I've just been teaching a series of disruptive ideation workshops for the U.S. Marine Corps in Quantico. And we spend a big chunk of that effort on understanding the problem before we ever even get into the ideation. But as soon as you start posing the questions, you're right. They want to, particularly Marines, right? They want to take that beach. They want to, they're going to be the ones at the tip of the spear, those kinds of things. And the quote I always like is the Albert Einstein quote. Albert Einstein says, if you gave me 1 hour to save the world, I'm going to spend 55 minutes understanding and defining the problem. Once I understand the problem, it'll take me 5 minutes to save the world.
Right.
Right? And versus 99% of the people out there don't spend enough time just taking a step back and thinking about Where do they focus? What is that opportunity? How do you frame it in such a way that it's even solvable, or that you can even understand it? And how do you then go about attacking it? And I agree that that's probably one of the big aha moments of don't rush in, don't rush the answer, right? And I don't know about you. I mean, I've done a lot of work with interns, but this is one of my criticisms of the educational process, right? Because we teach people how to do tests, and we produce the world's greatest test takers, which means I'm going to get the test. There's got to be one correct answer. I'm going to fill in my box, get my A, versus in reality in life, very rarely is there a single correct answer. There's multiple answers, and how do you find those? So in the case of the question methodology, then, are there because you can come. In my case, I've got a card deck my own. Mine's got 48 questions in it. Do you randomly pick a question, or is there a structure to how do you go through the questioning process to lead to that discovery?
Yeah, so with the methodology I have, there actually is a process. And so the 25 lenses, which are in the book, are categorized into 5 different groups.
Okay.
And so depending on the nature of the problem you're trying to solve, you will use those sets of lenses. So for example, most people, when they think of innovation, they think of ideation or idea management or suggestion boxes or hackathons and so what ends up happening is, if you think about it, the default question of a suggestion box is this big, broad, abstract question: how do I improve the business?
Right.
And when we ask these abstract questions, we get a lot of, like, from my experience, 99.9% of ideas that are generated are worthless.
Yeah, less than worthless.
Well, less than worthless, exactly. So because we wasted time thinking about it, submitting it, talking about it, evaluating it.
Well,
so
you haven't even defined the target.
Exactly.
Right? Come improve the business. Well, what the heck does that mean?
Exactly. So to me, the key is, so if you take that, so the first 5 lenses in the book are, how do we reduce abstraction?
Right.
All right. So if we're trying to improve the business, the first lens is the leverage lens. What's the one thing, if we focused on it, would have the greatest impact? And there's examples and when to use and how to use it. And so there's a process to go through, start to deconstruct the problem, or if it's too specific, how do we make it less so? And so there's 25 different lenses categorized.
And so if I define, when you say the 25 lenses, and you said, if I'm depending on the problem I'm going to solve, can you give me an example of a problem and then the lens you would apply to that?
Sure. So I'll tell you my favorite story. This is the one which people love when I tell it. Is you and I know we travel a lot, maybe not so much this week, but we travel a lot. And if we're gone for more than a few days, we have to check our bags. And people don't like getting off of a long flight, sitting at baggage claim, waiting for their bags. Mm-hmm. So one of the airports here in the US, they decided they were going to do some analysis. It took a long time, 15 to 20 minutes for the bags to get from the plane to the baggage carousel. So they decided to speed up the bags, cut it in half, 8 to 10 minutes, spent a ton of money, declared success, until everybody still was complaining that it took too long. And so in this case, what they realized is the bags took 8 to 10 minutes to get from the plane to the baggage carousel, but the passengers only took 1 to 3 minutes to get from the plane to the baggage carousel. So instead of speeding up the bags, they slowed down the passengers. They reconfigured the airport so that it would take people 8 to 10 minutes to get from the plane to the baggage carousel. That is an example of the flip lens. Instead of solving for this, we solve for that. Even though they were solving wait time is made up of 2 pieces: the speed of the bags and the speed of the passengers. So that's just one of the lenses. But another lens, let's just one quick play on this, is we could use the word substitution lens, where we just change a couple of words. So instead of reducing wait time, we could improve the wait experience. Different question.
Right.
And now it's not airports that we're talking to. We're talking to Disney and Universal Studios and how they create compelling wait experiences. So we can change just a couple of words and unleash a completely different and new range of opportunities.
That's great. And actually, those are 2 phenomenal experiences. My son works for Walt Disney Company in Orlando, and talk about the amount of thought that goes into changing that wait experience, and just the overall experience, right, is great insight. And those are just 2 of the lenses that are in the book. We're going to take another quick commercial break, but when we come back, Stephen, I'm going to ask you the question about what advice would you give to the listeners when trying to, find their own approach to, or using tools and techniques to unlock their own personal creativity. So don't go anywhere. We're going to be right back after this quick commercial break. You're listening to Killer Innovations on the BizTalk Radio Network. Welcome back to Killer Innovations. I'm your host, Phil McKinney. We are here with Stephen Shapiro. So, Stephen, we've covered a lot of material in the first 3 segments of the show. What I'd like for you to do is for you to kind of wrap this all up in with a nice bow on it. Can you give us one story that ties all of this together and that will give the listener some insight, some advice, some action that they can take in their own business and their own activities?
Sure. And I want to come back to something you said earlier. I do believe that our past success is one of the best predictors of future failure, because our past experiences limit our ability to think differently. So I want to focus on that as sort of the close. And there's a great example that I love. It's a group of people who get together in Houston, Texas, called Pumps and Pipes. Pumps and Pipes is a group of cardiologists who get together on a regular basis with people from the oil and gas pipeline industry. And, that sounds like, wow, that's a pretty crazy group of people. But actually what they do is they share the movement of a fluid through a tube. And so there's some amazing developments that they have created through these partnerships. So, for example, self-sealing pipelines. We get a paper cut. We don't have to get stitches, don't have to go to the hospital. So gas pipelines are able to build these little coagulant ingredients that seal minor cracks. But my favorite story that comes out of this is... and it just shows the power of collaboration, the power of bringing people with different perspectives, is how a cardiologist was having a problem that an oil pipeline engineer solved. And the story is that we get clots, and if you get a clot in your body, it goes to your brain, you can get a stroke, it can kill you. So this cardiologist is trying to figure out a way, how do we filter out and break up clots? And the oil engineer said, I have exactly the same problem. We call it sludge. And I developed a filter that does exactly that. And so they collaborated, this oil engineer collaborated with this cardiologist, and they developed something called the Greenfield Vena Cava filter that filters out and breaks up clots. And I was just giving a speech recently where someone in the audience came up to me and said, his life was saved because of this invention.
Wow.
And I think about saying that his life was saved because of an oil engineer, and who would have ever thought that would be possible? And that to me is what's so cool, is when we get those types of collaborations.
Well, I think those kinds of random connections. So are you saying then that, because this group exists, right? So are you suggesting then the listeners think about maybe adjacent or industries that have similar problems? They should go find those people? Is that the action?
Yeah, I call it a purposeful tangent. How do you spend time with people who aren't in your industry, aren't in your area of expertise? Right. So I'm in the world of innovation, but I spend a lot of time with magicians. Because magicians are really making the impossible possible. They're really understanding how the brain operates.
Right.
And I just find that that's a really powerful place. And one of the lenses is the analogy lens, to ask who else has solved a similar problem. And sometimes that's the fastest way to find a great solution, is to ask just who else.
Well, and I think it also points to the fact that very few innovations are truly start from zero. There's always some kind of an inspiration or some kind of a connection to something that has happened in the past that then became that spark, right? So the fact that this cardiologist shared a problem with a pipeline engineer, and the pipeline engineer goes, well, I've got a similar problem, maybe a path, or at least opens a door to thinking that could lead down a completely different path. The challenge, though, and I'll play devil's advocate here a little bit, is I may not obviously think about those analogies that make sense, right? I don't think I would have, if I was a cardiologist, I would have thought of pipeline engineers, right? How do you take a step back and recognize analogous industries or businesses that could potentially be insightful? How do you, because otherwise I'm thinking, okay, I'm a medical field. I got to look for other medical, versus I step back and I'm really dealing with fluids. I'm dealing with something more fundamental.
Well, and I think that it's that. So the analogy lens falls into the increase abstraction, because a lot of times we're very focused on a particular industry or function or area of discipline.
Right.
And so that's really it, is if we can increase the abstraction, we see those connections. And there are just so many powerful examples of this in action.
So, hey, Stephen, I want to thank you for taking the time to join us in today's show. If people want to keep up with what you're up to and what you're doing, if someone on the audience wants to invite you to come speak to their organization, their company, or their event, what is the best way for them, one, to get a hold of you, which I'm assuming is the same way to keep up with what you're doing?
I mean, steveshapiro.com is probably the best place. And there you'll find a link to the Invisible Solutions book. And there's a lot of really cool videos we created specifically for the book. So I think people really get a good sense of the content and how it works.
And so the book is out now, I'm assuming, right? It is up at Amazon, I'm assuming.
Yes.
And it's on all the other platforms, digital versions, audio versions, all that kind of good stuff. You and I should get together sometime and talk about publishers and dealing with the publishing industry. And talk about...
That's a good innovation conversation.
Don't get me started. Stephen, again, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule, particularly given the craziness that's going on a global basis. We've got to not let the disruptions disrupt our ability to innovate our way to solutions that are gonna solve the problems that we're all facing on a global scale. So again, thank you for taking the time and joining us here on Killer Innovations today.
Well, thank you, Phil. I appreciate it.
Great. As we wrap up today's show, just want to continue to remind you about sending us guest suggestions. We're always looking for good guests that have great stories, authors, speakers, people who are out there as real thought leaders to invite us here or join us here on Killer Innovations. I want to thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule. Time is precious each and every day, and I appreciate the time you spend with us subscribing and listening to the show. We're just coming up and wrapping up or kicking off season 16 here. That's right, 16. We just finished 15 years of doing this show, starting off as a podcast in 2005. I always enjoy reminding people that we started this podcast before iTunes even existed, which makes it I don't know. I guess we get the gold star for longevity. As you know, we started the show as a way to pay it forward. It's a way for us to give and provide information to you so that you can be more innovative, more creative, and you can go change the world with your ideas. So go out there, change the world, take your ideas. Don't write them just down in the notebook. Get up, get out there, try some experiments, talk with people, and do something. Have a change. You never know. The idea that's running around in your head, the idea that you've read down in your notebook can change other people's lives, just as the pipeline engineer helped the cardiologist that saved another person's life. You may have that magic solution. So go out there and give it a try. With that, we'll talk to you next week here on Killer Innovations. Bye-bye.